My parents called me their bad luck. When I left, I took all my luck with me. I grew up being told I was the reason everything went wrong in my family. My parents had my older brother first, and he was perfect. Good grades, good behavior, good at sports. Then they had me 3 years later, and according to them, that's when their luck ran out. My dad lost his job 6 months after I was born. My mom got into a car accident when I was 2. My grandmother died when I was 4. The family dog ran away when I was 5. Every bad thing that happened got pinned on me like I had some kind of curse attached to my existence. My mom started saying it as a joke at first. She'd laugh and call me her little storm cloud. Then it stopped being a joke. By the time I was 10, my parents openly blamed me for their problems. If the bill was higher than expected, it was because I was in the house using too much electricity. If something broke, it was because my bad energy made things fall apart. If my dad didn't get a promotion, it was because he had the burden of raising an unlucky child. My brother picked up on it and started calling me Jinx. The name stuck all through middle school and high school. I believed them for a long time. I thought maybe I really was cursed. I apologized constantly for things that weren't my fault. I tried to make myself small and invisible so my bad luck wouldn't spread. I got good grades hoping that would prove I wasn't a burden. I got a job at 16 and paid for my own clothes and school supplies so they couldn't say I was draining their money. Nothing I did changed how they saw me. When I was 17, my brother got accepted to a good college. My parents threw him a huge party and invited all their friends. They bragged about how he was going to be successful and make them proud. When I got accepted to the same college a year later with a better scholarship, my mom said it probably wouldn't last because things always fell apart for me. My dad said I should go to community college instead and save them the embarrassment when I inevitably failed. I went anyway. I left home at 18 with 2 suitcases and a bank account I'd been secretly filling for years. My parents didn't help me move. My brother didn't say goodbye. My mom told me to call when I needed to come home because she knew I would. I didn't call. College was hard, but not because of bad luck. It was hard because I had to unlearn everything my parents taught me about myself. I made friends for the first time. Real friends who didn't treat me like a curse. I joined clubs and studied things I actually cared about. I failed a test once, and my roommate said it was okay and we'd study harder next time. She didn't blame me for ruining anything. She just helped me do better. I graduated with honors. I got a job at an architecture firm in a city 4 hours from my hometown. I worked my way up for 5 years and became a project manager. I bought a small condo with my own money. I adopted a cat who didn't run away. I dated someone who actually liked being around me. Everything my parents said would fall apart stayed together because I built it myself without their voices in my head. Meanwhile, things got worse at home. My dad's drinking caught up with him and he lost another job. My mom's health declined because she refused to see doctors until problems became emergencies. My brother dropped out of college after 2 years and moved back home. He couldn't hold down a job and spent most of his time playing video games in his childhood bedroom. The golden child turned out to be fool's gold. They never connected the dots. They kept waiting for me to fail. My mom would call once a year on my birthday and ask how I was holding up. She said it like she expected me to be struggling. When I told her I got promoted, she said I shouldn't get too comfortable because good things don't last for people like me. When I told her I bought my condo, she asked how much debt I was in. When I told her I was happy, she laughed and said, "Give it time." I stopped telling her things. I stopped calling back. 3 years ago, my brother needed surgery and my parents couldn't afford it. My dad called me for the first time in years. He didn't ask how I was doing. He just said they needed money, and since I apparently had so much of it now, I should share with the family who raised me. I stare at my phone for 20 minutes after hanging up, my hands still shaking from hearing my father's voice demand money like I owe them something. The number 15,000 keeps repeating in my head like a broken record. 3 years of silence, and this is what breaks it. Not an apology or even a hello, just a dollar amount and the expectation that I'll pay it. My chest feels tight in a way I haven't experienced since I left home. That same crushing feeling of being blamed for existing. I set the phone down on the coffee table and watch it like it might ring again, like he might call back to say something worse. The living room gets darker as the sun sets, and I don't bother turning on the lights. My cat jumps onto the couch next to me, and I scratch behind her ears automatically, focusing on the soft fur instead of the anger building in my throat. Cillian comes home from work around 6:30 and finds me sitting in the same spot, still holding my phone even though I'd put it down earlier. I must have picked it back up without realizing. He drops his bag by the door, and I watch his face change as he takes in the dark room and my expression. I tell him about the call, and the words come out flat and mechanical, like I'm reading a grocery list instead of explaining how my father just demanded money after years of treating me like I was cursed. Cillian sits down next to me, and his jaw tightens in that way it does when he's angry but trying not to show it. He asks what my dad said exactly, and I repeat the conversation word for word because it's burned into my memory already. His face shifts from concern to something harder, protective, and somehow that makes me feel less crazy for being this upset. He asks if I'm okay, and the question makes me pause because I don't actually know the answer. Part of me wants to scream, part of me feels guilty for even being angry, and another part just feels sad and tired. I tell him I'm not sure, and he nods like that makes perfect sense. We sit in silence for a few minutes, and I try to sort through what I'm feeling. The anger makes sense. They called after 3 years just to ask for money. But the guilt confuses me. This nagging voice saying maybe I should help because he's family. Maybe refusing makes me just as bad as them. Then there's the sadness underneath it all. This heavy realization that this is what our relationship has become. That they only reach out when they need something from me. I grab my phone and pull up my therapist's contact information. My hands shake a little as I dial, and I get Milena's voicemail because it's after office hours. I leave a message asking if she has any emergency slots this week, because I can feel old patterns trying to crawl back into my brain. The voice in my head sounds exactly like my mother, telling me I'm being selfish, that family helps family, that good daughters don't abandon their brothers when they need surgery. I hate that voice, and I hate that it still has power over me after all these years. I hang up and tell Cillian I called my therapist, and he squeezes my hand, says that's a good idea. That night, I lie in bed staring at the ceiling while Cillian sleeps next to me. My brain won't shut off, just keeps cycling through memories I thought I'd dealt with already. I remember being 6 years old and my dad losing another job, how my mom said it was because having me around made him stressed and distracted. I was 6 months old when he lost the first job, and somehow that was my fault too. I remember the car accident when I was 2, how my mom told the story for years about how she was distracted thinking about me in the back seat and didn't see the other car. I remember my grandmother dying of cancer when I was 4, and my parents talking about bad luck following our family, looking at me when they said it like I'd personally given her the disease. The memories keep coming, each one a little cut that never quite healed, and I realize I'm crying without making any sound. Milena's office calls back the next morning while I'm getting ready for work. Her receptionist says she had a cancellation at 2 in the afternoon if I can make it. I call in sick to work, something I never do, and spend the morning pacing around my condo trying to distract myself. I clean the kitchen that's already clean. I organize my bookshelf by color, then by author, then back to color. I start 3 different shows on streaming and can't focus on any of them. When it's finally time to leave, I get to her office 15 minutes early and sit in my car rehearsing what I want to say. I walk into her office feeling like I've gone backwards in time, like I'm the anxious 23-year-old who first started therapy instead of the 28-year-old who thought she had her life together. Milena gestures to the familiar chair and I sit down, already feeling tears building up. She asks what happened and I tell her about the call, about my father's voice after 3 years, about the money demand, about all of it. The words pour out for 15 minutes straight and she just listens, occasionally nodding, letting me get it all out. When I finally stop talking, she waits a moment, then asks what I actually want to do. Not what I think I should do or what would make me a good person, but what I genuinely want. I admit I've already looked up Curtis's condition online, spent an hour last night reading medical websites about the surgery he needs. It's real and it's necessary, and without it, he could have serious complications. But I also know my parents have let him live at home rent-free for years, playing video games in his childhood bedroom while they paid for everything. They never made him get a job with insurance, never pushed him to be independent like they pushed me out the door at 18. I paid for my own clothes and school supplies at 16 while he's 31, and they still do his laundry. Milena asks why Curtis doesn't have insurance, and the question makes me stop and think. I realize it's because he's never held a job long enough to qualify for benefits. He's worked maybe 6 months total in the last 5 years, always quitting or getting fired, always moving back home where my parents enable him. They let him stay dependent while they blamed me for being a burden when I was literally a child. The double standard sits heavy in my chest. I was paying my own way as a teenager, and he's in his 30s getting supported completely. But somehow I'm the one who gets the call demanding money. We spend the next 30 minutes talking about the difference between helping family in an actual crisis versus rewarding the same broken patterns that made me leave in the first place. Milena points out that giving them money without any conditions would just confirm their belief that I exist to solve their problems, that I'm responsible for fixing everything that goes wrong in their lives. She asks what message it sends if I hand over $15,000 after they spent years telling me I was the source of all their bad luck. I hadn't thought about it that way, but she's right. It would be like agreeing with them, like accepting that I do owe them something for the burden of raising their cursed daughter. I leave therapy with homework to write down exactly what I'm willing to offer and what my boundaries are before I respond to my father. The idea of setting terms instead of just saying yes or no feels strange and scary and maybe a little powerful. Milena reminds me that I get to decide what kind of relationship I have with them, that I don't have to accept the role they assigned me. I drive home thinking about what reasonable help might actually look like, something that doesn't make me feel like I'm betraying myself, but also doesn't completely abandon Curtis when he's sick. That night, Cillian gets home around 7 and finds me sitting at the kitchen table with my laptop open and a notebook covered in scribbled thoughts. He sets down his work bag and comes over to kiss the top of my head before asking what I want for dinner. I tell him I don't really care, and he suggests we order from the Thai place down the street since neither of us feels like cooking. While we wait for the food to arrive, he sits across from me and asks how I'm doing with everything. I close my laptop and admit I've been going in circles all day trying to figure out what the right thing to do is. He reaches across the table and takes my hand, reminding me there might not be a clear right answer, but that doesn't mean I can't set boundaries around what I'm willing to offer. The food arrives and we eat at the table instead of in front of the TV like we usually do. Between bites of pad thai, I tell him I keep thinking about Curtis actually needing the surgery and how it feels wrong to just ignore that completely. Cillian nods and says he gets it, that wanting to help doesn't make me responsible for fixing everything my parents have messed up. He suggests maybe I could help Curtis directly with finding resources instead of just handing money to my parents who haven't managed their finances well in decades. The idea clicks something into place in my brain. I could research hospital payment plans and financial assistance programs, maybe even help Curtis apply for medical assistance if he qualifies. That feels different from writing a check to my father and pretending it will solve anything long-term. Cillian points out that way I'd be helping Curtis get the medical care he needs without enabling my parents to avoid taking any responsibility for how they got here. We talk through what that might look like practically, and I start feeling less trapped between two bad options. Saturday morning, I wake up determined to draft an email response before I lose my nerve. Cillian goes to the gym, and I make coffee and sit down at my laptop with a clear head for the first time since my father's call. I open a new message and type my father's email address in the recipient line, then stare at the blank space trying to figure out how to say what I need to say. The first draft comes out angry, and I delete it. The second one sounds too apologetic, like I'm asking permission to have boundaries. The third attempt feels closer. I write that I understand Curtis needs surgery, and I want to help him get the medical care he needs. Then I explain I'm not comfortable giving money directly to them, but I am willing to help Curtis research hospital financial assistance programs and payment plan options. I spend an hour rewording sentences and taking out anything that sounds defensive or like I'm justifying myself. By lunch, I have something that feels clear and firm without being mean. I save it as a draft instead of sending it right away because I want to read it again tomorrow with fresh eyes. Sunday, I read through it twice and make a few small changes. Cillian reads it over my shoulder and says it sounds reasonable and compassionate while still protecting my boundaries. I move my cursor to the send button and hesitate. Part of me knows sending this will probably make my parents angry. They want money with no strings attached, and I'm offering something different. But I also know that if I just give them what they want, I'll resent myself, and nothing will actually change. I take a breath and click send before I can second-guess myself again. Monday afternoon, my phone rings while I'm reviewing blueprints at work, and I see my mother's name on the screen. My stomach drops because I wasn't expecting her to call. I should let it go to voicemail, but some old instinct makes me answer. Before I can even say hello, she launches in about how she can't believe I would be so ungrateful after everything they did raising me. Her voice has that sharp edge that used to make me want to disappear when I was younger. She says they sacrificed so much for me and my brother, and this is how I repay them. I try to interrupt to explain that I offered to help, but she talks right over me. She brings up the email and says they don't need my charity. They need family loyalty. The word loyalty coming from her mouth almost makes me laugh, except it also makes my chest hurt. I spent my whole childhood being loyal to people who blamed me for existing. I managed to get a few words in about wanting to help Curtis find financial assistance, and she cuts me off again, saying that's not real help. Real help would be writing a check and trusting them to handle it. I can hear my father saying something in the background, but can't make out the words. My mother switches tactics and starts listing all the times I failed them growing up. She brings up the time I got a B in math in 6th grade like it was some massive disappointment instead of a normal grade. She mentions the school play I didn't get cast in 8th grade as evidence I wasn't trying hard enough. She twists every normal childhood moment into proof that I was defective somehow. I feel myself getting quieter on the phone. My response is getting shorter. It's like I'm 14 again, sitting at the kitchen table while she explains why the broken dishwasher is somehow connected to my bad energy. I hate that I'm falling into this pattern, but I can't seem to stop myself from shrinking. Then she says something that makes my whole body go still. She tells me I probably have plenty of money to spare since I don't have kids draining my resources like Curtis drained theirs. The casual way she blames a child for being born and needing things breaks something loose in my chest. I actually laugh out loud and it surprises both of us. The laugh isn't happy, it's the sound of something finally snapping after being bent too far for too long. She asks what's so funny in this cold voice, and I tell her that's exactly the problem. She's still blaming other people for her own choices, and I'm done being part of that. My voice shakes, but I keep talking. I say I spent my whole life being blamed for things I couldn't control, and I'm not doing it anymore. She tries to interrupt like she always does, but this time I don't let her. I talk over her and explain that I'll help Curtis directly with finding resources and payment options, but I won't hand over money to enable them to keep refusing to take responsibility for their situation. I can hear my father yelling something in the background about disrespectful children and ungrateful daughters. My mother's voice shifts from angry to ice cold in a way that used to terrify me as a kid. She says fine, they'll figure it out themselves like they always have to. No thanks to me. She hangs up before I can say anything else, and I'm left standing in my office holding my phone with my hand shaking. I walk to the bathroom and lock myself in a stall for 10 minutes trying to get my breathing under control. My whole body feels like it's vibrating with adrenaline and anger and something that might be pride. I actually stood up to her. I said things I've thought for years, but never had the courage to say out loud. When I finally come out, I wash my face with cold water and go back to my desk. I can't focus on work for the rest of the afternoon. Cillian finds me that evening sitting on the couch staring at nothing. He sits down next to me, and I immediately start crying these angry, frustrated tears that I've been holding in since the phone call ended. He pulls me against his chest and just holds me while I cry. When I can finally talk, I tell him about the call, and how my mother brought up every childhood failing like I was on trial. I tell him about the comment about kids draining resources, and how something just broke in me, hearing her blame Curtis for existing the same way she blamed me. Cillian runs his hand through my hair and says, "Setting boundaries doesn't make me a bad person." He reminds me that they called asking for help, but the second I offered help that came with any conditions, they rejected it. They wanted me to fix their problem without them having to change anything about how they operate. I know he's right, but it still hurts. Some part of me kept hoping they might surprise me and actually hear what I was saying. Instead, they proved they're exactly who I've always known them to be. I spend the next day drafting an email to Curtis. I find his old address in my contacts from years ago and stare at the blank message for 20 minutes trying to figure out what to say. I delete 3 different versions before settling on something short and practical. I write that I want to help him directly with researching hospital payment plans and financial assistance programs. I list a few specific resources I found online and offer to help him apply for them. I don't mention our parents or the phone call or any of the family drama. I keep it focused on the actual problem instead of all the emotions around it. My finger hovers over the send button for another 5 minutes before I finally click it. The email disappears, and I immediately wonder if the address even works anymore, or if it'll just bounce back. I check my email obsessively for the next 3 days. Every notification makes my stomach jump, even when it's just work stuff or spam. I keep my phone next to me constantly and wake up in the middle of the night to see if he responded. Cillian notices me checking my phone at dinner and asks if I'm expecting something important. I tell him about the email, and he squeezes my hand across the table without saying anything. On the 3rd day, I get a response. Curtis writes back with just a few sentences thanking me for offering, but saying our parents already found another solution. He doesn't explain what solution they found or where the money came from. I read the message 5 times looking for hidden meaning or subtext, but it's just straightforward and brief. I feel this weird mix of relief that I don't have to get more involved and guilt that maybe I should have just given them the money. I hate that I'm still second-guessing myself about people who have never second-guessed treating me badly. My therapy appointment with Milena is 2 days later, and I bring up the phone call immediately. She listens while I recount the whole conversation, including the part where my mother listed all my childhood failures like evidence in a trial. Milena asks me to notice how I responded during different parts of the call, and I realize I got quieter and quieter as my mother talked. I fell right back into that pattern of just accepting whatever she said and getting smaller. I apologized for things that weren't my fault, just like I did when I was 10 years old. Milena points out that I also broke the pattern by speaking up at the end. She says the fact that I regressed initially doesn't erase the fact that I found my voice and set a boundary. I tell her it doesn't feel like enough because I still let her talk to me that way for most of the call. Milena reminds me that changing patterns takes time, and I shouldn't expect myself to be perfect at it immediately. She asks what I learned from the interaction, and I say, I learned my mother will never see me differently, no matter what I accomplish. Milena nods and says, that's actually important information, because now I can stop trying to prove myself to someone who refuses to see the proof. I spend the rest of the week checking my phone constantly, even though Curtis already responded. I keep expecting my parents to call back with more demands or anger, but there's nothing. The silence feels almost worse than another fight because it confirms what I already suspected. They were interested in my money, not in having any kind of relationship with me. If they actually cared about me as a person, they would have followed up or at least pretended to care how I was doing. Instead, they got told no and just disappeared again. I tell Milena about this in our next session, and she asks how that makes me feel. I say it makes me sad but also kind of free because now I don't have to wonder anymore if they might change. Work becomes the place where I can stop thinking about all of it. I throw myself into a new project designing a community center and spend hours at my desk working through details. I stay late 3 nights in a row and come in early twice. Joachim stops by my office on Friday afternoon and comments that I've been putting in a lot of extra hours lately. He asks if everything is okay and suggests I take a day off next week. I realize I've been using work to avoid dealing with my feelings about the whole family situation. I thank him and promise to take Monday off, even though the idea of having a whole day with nothing to distract me sounds awful. Alyssa catches me in the break room that afternoon and asks if I want to grab lunch. We go to a place down the street and order salads that we both barely touch while I tell her everything. I explain about being the family scapegoat and my brother's surgery and my father's call demanding money. I tell her about the phone call with my mother and how I finally stood up to her but still feel guilty. Alyssa listens without interrupting, and when I finish, she tells me she's been no contact with her father for 6 years. She says the guilt never completely goes away, but it does get easier over time.